Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Two Footed Tackle Podcast World Cup edition, episode 17. Only got 17, I think it is. Only got 6 more, which is insane to think about. And yeah, it's just insane to think about. I think I've said that for the last couple of episodes, but yeah, it's pretty mental to think that we're getting towards the back end of the tournament when I can literally remember Senegal or Ecuador, Qatar. Sorry, starting literally. It feels like yesterday, but I guess time flies when you're having fun, as the saying goes. So yeah, there you go. It has been a pretty good tournament so far. Of course, it's been well documented on this podcast. We've had some upsets. We've had some storylines coming out of it, which is good. But as we get into the business end of things. We're getting into the business end of things now, I should say, and it's going to get interesting from here on, no doubt. If it wasn't already interesting already, so I thank you all for the support. I think that's something which I am been most grateful and most I would say shocked, but or shocked maybe a little bit of an accurate description, but I'm very grateful regardless of all the support on every episode. It does mean the world to me. It truly does. So thank you all very much for the likes, for the shares, for the comments, for all the interactions. And once again, it means the absolute world. And I think anything else. Hope everyone's well. Hope everyone's day as well as always. I feel like it's a good way to start the podcast. Hoping everyone's well. Hope everyone's well. I'm a bit. I want to say flat, but suffering a little bit of burnout, maybe I should say. From this, if I'm going to be brutally honest, but no, once I start speaking, once I start recording, once I start looking at the games again, and etc., I get into that mood. I get into that mood where I don't shut up. That's why I do this podcast. But we're gonna battle through. We're gonna get this done. I've made a pact to myself, and I made a promise that I won't miss any episodes, just throughout the podcast as well. But in this World Cup especially, I have not missed a scheduled podcast since the start of this. What's it called? Of this podcast, I should say. Haven't missed an episode. The times have varied throughout, especially this World Cup, but that's out of my control. But no, yeah, it's been good. I've maintained a relatively consistent schedule, which is something which, if you know me, is very unlike me. But that's something I'm evolving every day, so which is good. But let's move on and let's stop me rambling and let's crack onto the games that occurred. Of course, it was Asia representing over the morning or across this morning, I should say, Australian time. It was, of course, Japan versus Croatia and South Korea versus Japan versus Brazil, I should say. Of course, it's quite funny how both Asian sides who have some history, to say the least, between each other, how they were playing on the same day. And I think from an external perspective, whilst also supporting Asian football, I wanted both to win. It would be great to see both win. Like I said, being from the external perspective, but still looking at through the Asian football lens. Ideally, I wanted both sides to win. But if you'd asked each respective side if they wanted the other one to win, I don't think you get the same response as what I just gave. But there you go. It is what it is. Okay, let's crack onto the games. And once again, I don't know how long this podcast is going to be because I really stretched it out yesterday, and there's only 2 games to speak about. Only 2 games to give predictions on, and because I don't give any reasoning with my predictions, that obviously doesn't take into account anything. So this podcast will probably stretch on to 35 minutes. Probably, I think that's going to be the length of the rest of the podcast. Of the rest of the episodes, this podcast just due to the fact, because of the fact that there's only 2 games to speak about, and of course when we get to the semi-finals, there's only going to be 1 game to speak about, I think. Or even the quarters, I think they're on 4 separate days, if I'm not mistaken, or the quarters on 2 days over. Okay, yeah. So the quarters, I'll still have 2 games to speak about. But the semi-final, I'll only have 1 game to speak about. until we go to the final, where I only have one game to speak about as well. And I'm not doing a podcast for the third place playoff game because I don't think I'm even going to watch that. It's at 2 a.m. So, the final's at 2 a.m. as well. Oh, that's great. That's actually really good. So happy the final's at 2 a.m. not 6. Anyways, let's move on. Have we done? Yeah, okay. Have we done anything else in terms of rambling before we get onto the games? Oh yeah, Ronaldo. I don't know if I'll speak about him. If I get to the end of this podcast and I want to speak about him, I will. But you've seen the news. You've been on Twitter or any social media. So anyway, let's crack on. Let's go to the first game. Japan-Croatia. Now, this, of course, is the first game that has gone all the way to the penalty shootout to decide the outcome of the game. Of course, we all know what happened. It finished 1-1 after 90 minutes. And despite... it finished 1-1 after 90 minutes. And it went all the way to the penalties. To penalty shootouts. And penalty shootouts decided decided the fate of both sides. It was, of course, a pretty even-ish game. Both sides really were kind of both had chances throughout the game. Both sides had kind of a dominant, I wouldn't say dominant period in the game, but both sides definitely had a period of the game where they were on top mostly. I think Japan, if you look at it, it was probably once they scored that goal, they really tried to kick on with things and really tried to get that second before halftime. And then it was, or even before their goal, actually, it did come off the back of some pretty good dominance from Japan across that maybe 5 minutes or so, maybe even 10, before their goal, and they really carried on with that. So that was probably their most dominant period. And when we look at Croatia, it was probably when they scored the goal, that period, maybe 10 minutes before and 5 minutes after, where they were looking to press, they found that breakthrough, and then they were looking to go again. They were looking to go again in terms of try to get that second goal after they scored. So yeah, both sides had dominant periods in the game. Both sides had periods in the game where they could have made it 2 or 3 and really killed the game, but they didn't. Both sides were slightly, I wouldn't say profitable getting in front of goal or wasteful, but both sides definitely could have. Both sides definitely could have had a lot more. Both sides definitely could have had a lot more of the could have had a lot more chances, especially towards the back end of the game where both sides were tiring. So it is one of those. It is one of those things where you look at it from that perspective and you say, okay, maybe a draw was the fair result. Of course, it was a goal from who scored it, Dazin Maeda, who's been very good this tournament as well for Japan, just ever so quietly. His goal, of course, was given onside after their. I think it was given onside as well on the pitch, but they just reviewed it and upheld the decision. And then, of course, on the 55th minute, I should say, Ivan Perisic scored a fucking bullet header. It was a fantastic finish. World-class header from Perisic, and he's someone who's always been a constant threat for this Croatian side. Has been, of course, was in 2018, played a fantastic World Cup there, scored in the final if memory serves. So we all know that he's very good on the world stage, a very good performer on the international stage, and just this game was once again another game that proved it. It was a fantastic header, a very good goal to score in a time which they needed it as well. The game, of course, saw out the 90 minutes and then saw out the extra time. Apologies. Saw out the extra time. And it went all the way to penalties, where it was a disaster class of a penalty shootout if you're a Japanese supporter. I think, realistically, all 3 pens that missed, of course, it was Minamino, Matoma, and Yoshida who missed. Asano was the one in between all of those that scored. The 3 penalty misses were very disappointing, very poor shots at goal. Realistically, they should be doing a lot better. From 11 meters, from 12 yards, and it goes back to that thing of, do you think they practice them? Based on what they looked like, they looked hesitant. They looked like they were scared. I don't think any of the saves were particularly good. I just thought the saves were just needed to be made, and Yeah. I mean, they're disappointing penalties. Of course, Vlasic, Brozovic, and Pasalic. Pasalic. Why can't I say his name? As someone who has a pretty good dialect in terms of being able to pronounce European names, you think I'd understand how to pronounce Palisic, but Pasalic. I can't even be bothered. Livaja as well was the man who missed for Croatia. Of course, hit the upright. No, hit the post, I should say. Which I think is the upright. Hit the woodwork anyway. So yeah, of course it was 0-0, 1-0, 0-1, 0-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-3. So yeah, it was pretty disappointing penalty shootout. I went into it. If I could speak, I went into it um, hoping that we could see maybe like a 7-6, 8-7 type operation. I prefer longer penalty shootouts. They're quite entertaining, but yeah, this was a pretty. I guess his penalty shootout was entertaining as well, just because of the madness of it. Of course, it was the first game that went into extra time, let alone penalties. So, all the games so far, all the games around 16 have gone pretty much as people would expect. All the underdogs all the favourites have won. All the favourites have won in 90 minutes. And all the favourites have been very, very composed in their performances. Maybe barring Croatia, who had a little bit of a scare, but Japan are a very good side. And if you take a look at how both sides lined up, Japan did go to that back three. Japan did go to that back three that has served them so well. That has served them so well, especially in second halves of games. Of course, with Nagatomo being on that right hand side, on that left hand side, I should say, on that left hand side midfield, that can kind of come back into a three, into a four, allowing you Wanya Ito, who played on that right hand side of midfield, playing that right wing back role, to get up the pitch a little bit more and to occupy a little bit more advanced positions. But apart from that, I think Endo was absolutely fantastic. I thought Watsura Endo was unbelievable. I just thought he was world class. And he's a player which I flagged pre-tournament, who was going to be Japan's key man. If he played well, then Japan played well, and he played well again this morning against Croatia. He was exceptional. Just shuttling between the lines. I don't know what his stats were for the game, but he had 2 big chances created, 6 of 7 ground duels won, 2 tackles, 3 clearances. Was just really, really good. A shot on target, 88% accurate passes, 4 key passes as well. So he was a defensive maestro that also dictated tempo and was able to act as a very good attacking outlet or a creative outlet, I should say, for Japan, which is something that they have lacked in terms of having like a real playmaker. They do in terms of what I mean by that. Maybe they don't like playmakers, but their system isn't suited to having playmakers, isn't suited to dominating the ball and trying to find that pass. It is very high tempo, high energy, counter-attacking style football, and I think that goes to the stats as well. Obviously Croatia had a lot more, had more of the ball, had many more passes as well. So, Japan were looking to, I wouldn't say hit on the counter attack a lot, but especially in comparison to their games against Spain and Germany. But apologies there, especially in comparison to the games against Spain and Germany. They were looking to maybe dominate the ball a little bit more than what they normally would. However, they did look to isolate areas of spacing behind the Croatian defence and really try to exploit those spaces, especially on the counter attack, using pace with Kamada, Doan, Yanyo Ito as well. And then off the bench as well. Off the bench, I brought on Minamino, they brought on Asano, Matoma as well. So, it was a clearly defined way of playing football for Japan, and that's something that they've played throughout the tournament. This high energy, counter-attacking, high tempo style of football, which has worked for them. Obviously, worked against Spain, worked against Germany, and it nearly worked against Croatia. So they can hold their heads up high. They were outstanding throughout this tournament, barring that one little mishap against Costa Rica, which realistically, if you think about it, they should have won that game, and if they did win that game, they would have finished their group on 9 points, which is just absolutely crack to think about. But maybe finishing top of that group was a little bit of a curse. Of course, Spain, who finished second, will versus Morocco. Will versus Morocco tomorrow morning. And obviously, you'd like to think Croatia were a little bit of a harder side than Morocco. However, Morocco did finish top of their group. So who knows? Maybe I'll come here tomorrow when Morocco have knocked off Spain, and who knows? Who knows what could happen? But when we look at it from a Croatia perspective, I think their game is kind of very dependent on. I wouldn't say very dependent, but it is very much dictated, and their performance is very much dictated by that midfield three. Of course, Brozovic, Kovacic, and Modric. All the itches. How many itches? How many itches? So you have Livakovic, Juranovic, Lovren, who is in an itch, and Gvardiol, who is in an itch. Barasic, Kovacic, Brozovic, Modric, Kamaric, Petkovic, and Perisic off the bench. Any more itches? You had Orsic, you had Vlasic, you had Pasalic. But apart from that, you had Maya, Livaya, and Budimir. There you go. But you had, I love the, I don't know. As I find it funny. I know it's probably a little bit racist. I wouldn't say racist. Maybe some stereotyping, maybe. But I like it. I find it quite amusing, and it's very satisfying to say Perisic, Livakovic. I know Livakovic is with a hard C, I think. No, with CH. I think anyway. Who knows? But anyway, I completely lost track of thought. The midfield three, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, that midfield three is their engine. You see some sides who use their midfield in different ways. Teams, maybe if you try and look at it from club football, a team that uses their midfield very differently to what some other teams use their midfield for. You could look at Liverpool. Liverpool use their midfield to be very industrious, very hardworking, very workmanlike, just getting the job done. Whereas Croatia, of course, different comparison, international to club, but I'm just using it to try and compare it, if I could, in the best way possible, I should say. Croatia's midfield is very technical, very much the part of their team which they need to get right. If you can get on top of that Croatian midfield, you really stop all supply to their front line, and subsequently you really stop all protection for their back line as well. Because while Modric and Kovacic aren't very good defensively, and while Brozovic, while being a very good number 6, isn't necessarily a kind of holding midfielder, he's more of a playmaking midfielder. What that midfield allows is that it keeps possession. I don't know how many passes. So it's you had Kovacic who had 71 touches, Brozovic who had 143 touches, and Modric who had 89 touches. Right, so when you look at that, you can see just how much they like to get on the ball, just how much they like to control the tempo, and what that allows is that when they do get on the ball, if I can bring up accurate passes, yeah. So you had Modric, Kovacic, and Brozovic, all in the top 7 of passes, of successful passes just throughout the game. So what that means is, when you look at that midfield, obviously, despite it not being very good defensively, despite it not having a true number 6, like a Casemiro or someone like that, what it does defensively that other midfields don't is that it just keeps the ball. It just keeps the ball. The best way of defense is to attack. And I think Pep Guardiola might have said something along these lines, is if we have the ball, you can't score. So realistically, playing possession-based football is actually a very defensive way of playing football, and that's what that Croatian midfield is kind of. Is the rationale it gets behind is, we're just going to keep the ball. We're very good at keeping the ball. We're just going to pass the ball around, and the more we have the ball, the less chances you're going to get, which means the less likely of the. If I could speak, that'd be unbelievable. The more we have the ball, the less likely of you actually scoring, or the less likely of you actually getting a chance to score, subsequently scoring. So it's actually a very good tactic, and it works very well for that Croatian team because of just how balanced their midfield is. You've got Brozovic who holds, Modric who is that creative player. Sorry, and then you have Kovacic who is a little bit more. I wouldn't say workmanlike, because Brozovic is very workmanlike, but Kovacic likes to get on the ball, carry the ball, a little bit more niggly, a little bit more offensively minded, a little bit, if you were to call him that. But yeah, I think their midfield is by far their most important part, I think, of their game especially. Yes, okay. Apologies if there was a quick cut. I felt the coughing fit coming, so I didn't want to do it on the podcast and having to cut quickly. I still am a little bit sick. I think I've got some form of chest thing going. The tonsillitis is gone as well, so for anyone keeping track of my medical condition, which is good, but no, the cough's still there, unfortunately, which is a bit annoying considering that I have to try and speak fluently for 35 minutes a day without stopping and doing it at somewhat of a high tempo. So anyway, let's move on and let's go to the other game, and it was Brazil versus South Korea. Yeah, just if I was to use a Greek word, they ramisied them. They just destroyed them. Just brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. You can't really put it any other way. Yeah, it started nice and early. Ball to the back post for Vinicius Jr. For Vinny Jr., who took a touch and just scored comfortably. 6 minutes later, 6 minutes later, Richarlison gets ahead of the defender who brings him down. Penalty, Neymar scores in the most audacious way possible. And then 16 minutes later, Richarlison, I think that was the goal, which was like that very good passing move. I think it was anyway. Although it might have been the Paqueta goal, I don't know. But anyway, Richarlison got on the end of a pass from Thiago Silva, who scored. And then obviously 7 minutes later, Paqueta made it 4. And game, set, match. Just what more can you say, really? What more can you say? It was an annihilation from start to finish. Just a pure and utter annihilation, and you can't really put it any other way. Really, you can't really put it any other way. It was something which shocked me to a little bit of an extent because when you look at the way South Korea have been operating throughout this tournament, it is very. How do you describe it? South Korea are a very robust team, very disciplined team. They don't really give up a lot of space, and when they do, they are very aggressive. They are very assertive in their defensive positioning, in their pressing. They're very aggressive. So it did shock me to a bit of an extent the way that they were able to, or like just how easily Brazil were able to just pass through and just break down South Korea. I don't know if this came through a little bit of complacency or if they had already played their World Cup final in the last group game against Portugal. But we all know that they're capable because they were capable of beating Portugal, right? So they were obviously capable of getting a result against Brazil. Of course, this was a Brazil team with Neymar back into the side, who I want to speak about after I speak about South Korea. But yeah, it's one of those things where styles make fights. And I've said this a lot of times on this podcast. Styles make fights. That's a phrase used in combat sport, and I think it's a phrase that can be translated directly into football. Styles make games. Styles of teams and systems and tactics of teams make a good game. They make a really good game. And what that means is when you have a side that leaves a lot of space versus a side that likes to exploit space, for example, obviously this isn't relating to Brazil, South Korea, but when you take a side, I don't know if I could use it to club football. Leeds. Let's use Leeds because this is the example that always pops into my mind, and this is an example when I think I've used many times on this podcast. When you have a team like Leeds who leave a lot of space deliberately as a defensive tactic, they leave a lot of space, and then when you verse a side like Tottenham, especially under Antonio Conte, or Liverpool, where their modus operandi and their real rationale is see space, exploit space. Or no, see space, isolate space, exploit space, then you get for a very poor kind of way of, or a very mismatch in terms of systems. Whereas if you look at Leeds and then you look at someone like a Chelsea, who don't like to exploit space, who aren't as prolific at exploiting space, then you can be a little bit more competitive. Despite Chelsea and Tottenham potentially being on the same level playing field, the systems of both sides allow for Leeds to have a little bit of a different game in comparison when you look at Chelsea in comparison to Spurs. Very similar here. Portugal do play a very different way in comparison to Brazil, and that of course allowed South Korea to be a lot more comfortable in the game, despite the talent discrepancy between the two sides potentially not being despite not being as great. Obviously, Portugal do have a fantastic team, so do Brazil. Despite the talent discrepancy not being as great as potentially what the results may seem, the way that both sides play football just allows for a completely different game. And this is something that you need to take into consideration when you do predict things, when you do analyse things, because Brazil are a side that it's kind of their kryptonite. They were their kryptonite. Of course, Brazil do like to play a very structured game, but a game that likes to use the flanks a lot. Of course, with Rafinha and it was Vinicius Junior, of course. Rafinha and Vini Junior on either side. They like to use that with Neymar, of course, playing in that number 10 role. Likes to float in behind. Likes to kind of be very free. Richarlison can be fluid as well, and obviously Paqueta playing alongside Casemiro. It gives the license to Paqueta to be that a little bit more advanced. And when we look at this Brazil team, of course, they were underwhelming against Switzerland in their second game, and of course they lost against Cameroon. Now, this is something that I flagged a couple of podcasts ago, and that was the difference between Brazil with Neymar and without Neymar is night and day. Like, it is night and day. And they are so heavily reliant on him to get that forward structure ticking and to get that forward structure and that forward system moving and getting it playing expansive, fluid football, that the heavy reliance on him could come back to bite them if he does get another injury, if he does get suspended. We don't know what could happen to this Brazil team, because we've seen, without him, underwhelming against Switzerland. They lost to Cameroon. He comes back into this side against South Korea, and they look a completely different team going forward. They were so much more fluid. They were energised. They were aggressive. They were intricate. They were doing everything right. And Neymar was the fulcrum behind that and was the key mastermind behind that. We saw in those two games where he weren't there, we saw in those two games when he wasn't there, Brazil looked late, they looked lethargic, they looked not energized, they looked not willing to take that final pass and to make that risky pass and try and break through the lines. Whereas now with him, they've got so much more freedom. They're just playing this expansive way of playing football that destroyed South Korea. 4 goals in 35 minutes, see you by game set match. It's it's one of those things, isn't it? Where despite Neymar only getting 1 goal, and it was of course got a goal and an assist, of course the goal came from a penalty. Of course, he's one of those things, isn't it? Where you look at it and you have to take into consideration not only the talent that they've got, but who are they relying on. They're relying on Neymar a lot. So I don't know what that means. I really don't know what that means, because we've seen when he's out, they look a different team. Of course, when he was out, they moved to a 4-3-3 a little bit. They moved Paqueta into the number 10 role, I'm pretty sure. If I'm not mistaken, anyway, when he didn't play. So of course, in that game against Cameroon, they went with Rodrigo playing that number 10 role, Fabinho alongside Fred holding. And then in the Switzerland game, they went with Paqueta, Fred, Casemiro as a flat midfield 3. So, yeah, there you go. Huh? It's interesting to see how the dynamic shifts. It's very interesting to see how the dynamic shifts between both, between a Neymar less Brazil and a Brazil with Neymar. Yeah, it's quite interesting. As we tick just under the half an hour mark, I don't know what more to speak about. I think I've spoken about both games relatively in depth enough. South Korea, I mean, a very disappointing campaign. Very disappointing game. Not campaign. Campaign very well, very good. They got through a group where no one really expected them to get through. They beat Portugal on the final day. They potentially should have beaten Ghana. They lost 3-2 to Ghana. They potentially should have beaten them anyway. I think that was the game they lost 3-2. Yeah, they lost 3-2 to Ghana. In a game which they probably could have and potentially should have won. So a very disappointing game, but overall I think they can hold their heads quite high and be quite proud of their performance because of what they were able to do, especially in the group stage. They got 4 points. They beat Portugal. They did their nation proud, I'm sure, and they represented Asia, the Confederation of Asia, quite proud as well. It's just a shame how things ended, and I think Brazil are, if they can keep Neymar fit, going to be one of the most favorite. They're going to be the favourites of the tournament, no doubt. And this, of course, sets up a game between Brazil and Croatia, which, of course, will be very tasty, very very tasty, because it's going to be a game where Croatia will probably be very confident. Croatia will probably be looking to dominate a lot of the ball, dominating a lot of possession, and really maintaining a lot of tempo, or maintaining a lot of maintaining tempo, maintaining possession, being very fluid, being very calm in the way that they're playing. That's obviously how Croatia will look to approach the game. Whereas when you look at Brazil will be looking to play a little bit more high tempo, looking to use that pace that they've got out wide, especially in the front line, that very fluid and intricate play that they've got, players that they've got that can really just change a game or turn a game on its head. That's the avenue that they'll be looking to exploit, no doubt. But we'll predict that when it comes to it. Although I think Brazil should get it done. I mean, I don't know when that game is. I don't know how many podcasts I've got until that game. I've only got one more. Oh my god! So I have a break after tomorrow. Fucking yes. Anyway, okay. Spain, Morocco, Portugal, Switzerland, and then Croatia, Brazil on the 10th. Okay, I just realised that. I was wondering when my break was going to come, because they didn't do a break for the round of 16 games. In terms of, they didn't do a break for the group stage into the round of 16. They went just straight into it. So they're doing a break for the quarters, which is good. I can finally get a sleep in, and I can not stress about this and all that good stuff. But 32 minutes. Am I done? I think these podcasts are just going to be a little bit shorter, to be honest. There's not really a whole lot to speak about. Of course, there was that thing going on Twitter about that stadium being knocked down, only used for 7 games, and being knocked down and I can't remember the word. Refurbished, is that the word? And being built elsewhere. I mean, if we're going to speak about the logistics about this Qatari World Cup, and we're going to speak about the non-footballing aspects, I think we can do a 17-part podcast documentary series about that whole thing. So, I mean, I've done my best to kind of just ignore it. I'll not ignore it because it's obviously very important, but to just kind of focus on the football, because that's what this podcast is about. It's football. It's not a political. It's not a political statement, this podcast. And despite that phrase, keep politics out of football, or keep politics out of sport, which is my most hated phrase in the world, because if you just know a little bit about the operations of sport, you know that it is so ingrained in politics, it's unbelievable. Like, in my opinion, sport, and football in particular, is just a sector of politics now. It's just a sector of politics. As the same is finance, the same is with health. Football and sport is a sector of politics, in my opinion. People are acting like sports washing is a new thing. People forget that they literally hosted the Olympic Games in Nazi Germany. I don't know if that's going to, I don't know if people know that, or if people just choose to forget that, but sports washing isn't a new thing, people. Sports washing isn't a new thing, let's put it that way. So yeah, anyway, slight tangent. And also, that's also, I just want to speak about that. And Ronaldo, fucking Ronnie, going to Saudi Arabia, apparently. Hopefully nothing is hoping nothing is finalised until tomorrow. Until after the World Cup, because I really don't want to speak about club football. That's why I haven't spoken about I haven't spoken about other things that have happened in club football, because this isn't the podcast for it. This is the World Cup podcast. Anyway, let's move on. Let's predict Morocco, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, and then we're going to wrap up. 34 minutes. Okay. Morocco, Spain. Morocco, Spain. We'll go with 3-2 Spain after extra time. And then Portugal, Switzerland. I'm going to go with... Fuck it. I'm going to go with Switzerland. I'm going to go with Portugal 1, Switzerland 2. I think Switzerland will do what they did against France, to be honest. And get the job done. Although I do want both Spain and Portugal to win because I love the elite in sport. I love the elite, so I want the best players playing in the best games, in the most high-profile games. That's why I want the Messi versus Ronaldo World Cup final. Like, I like those. I want those, but I think Switzerland will win. Anyway, I think we're done. Thank you all very much for sticking around for another episode of the Two Foot Attack podcast. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. If you did, make sure you subscribe, like, share it around, do all that good stuff. It would mean the world to me if you could just share it around, give it some love, give it the love it deserves. I think it's a pretty good podcast. There you go. Make sure you follow all the socials in the links in the description on YouTube, links in the bio on Twitter and Instagram. See you guys tomorrow for the final episode before we have a slight break, which will be very much welcomed for my sleep schedule. But yes, thank you very much for watching. See you guys tomorrow. Speak soon. Goodbye.